morning, everybody. Today we have a lecture in literary criticism, and we would like to start with a historical survey of literary criticism. And you know that we cannot start teaching literary criticism unless we shed light on the fathers and masters of literary criticism. Therefore, we will today move into history and start with the greatest figure in the world of philosophy and literary criticism, represented by Plato. And you know that Plato's name in the history of literary criticism is so important. And this importance comes from the fact that he is the first person in the history of a human mind who talked about the cause of poetry in society. And according to the Western civilization, they believe that Plato's theories concerning literature are all what? References to the modern ones. And all Western philosophies now are just a footnote to his own mother philosophy. And we have to take into account that Plato does not deal with the materialistic world that most philosophies try to tackle or talk about. His philosophy is known or distinguished by its, let me say, uniqueness. And Plato rejected the worldly ideas, and he tries to take the mind of man into the highest levels of knowledge. Accordingly, he believed that man cannot reach knowledge, reality, I mean the ultimate reality, the one reality, the absolute reality, unless he uses his own mind. Because he thinks that passions and feelings or emotions are inferior to mind, and they are always busy with the worldly matters, while mind takes man to the highest levels of wisdom. This is really about Plato's philosophy in general. But we have to take into account the reasons behind the emergence of such philosophy at that time. You know that the Greek society at that time considered literature and the poets the main system of society. And poets at that time were considered teachers and leaders who lay the rules and laws of their society. And people at that time were so involved with the poets. Then we see day after day the Greek society witnessed kind of collapse in its moralistic build or structure, or in its, let me say, even on the level of army or war. The empire started getting weak day after day. Why? Because of the effect of literature on the passions of society. Plato recognizes the fact that it is only philosophy which can save the nation from its destruction and collapse. And then he initiated his academy, and he wrote his famous book, The Republic, to formulate his own theory, not only with poetry, but with other subject matters which may re-regulate the order of the Greek society and to regain discipline into this society. And here we see that Plato has certain points one has to talk about, and they are called the Plato's dilemma. And let us see what are these things that he attacked against poetry, and why he esteemed poetry low, has no meaning, dangerous, source of corruption. Let us see. Number one, the poet as divinely inspired. This is really one of the main charges or attacks that he laid against the poet and poetry. According to the primitive civilization, as we see, the poet was a possessed creature. I mean by possessed creature that the poet has no independent will. That means he cannot control his feeling, his emotion, his mind. He is completely passive. Language, or he uses language in the way that normal human beings do. That means his language is as our own language when he is an ordinary man. But later on, when he is being possessed by wild power, his language will change. And this change is so dangerous because Plato thinks that this wild power is unknown. No one knows its source, from where it comes. Yes. And speaking in a divinely inspired, from such a view, removed the poet from ordinary canons of judgment and made him something between a prophet and a madman. Therefore, he says that the poet is in between being what? A prophet or a madman. And this idea is there, even in the Holy Quran, in the verse, Ash-Shu'ara, Sha'irun Majnoon, when they attacked the Prophet Muhammad, calling him Sha'irun Majnoon. Why? Because they think that anyone who speaks poetry, either prophet or a madman. And we will come to this idea of being a madman. Plato developed this view at a greater length in his Aeon. And in another book called Aeon, he developed this idea in which the poet is presented as the inspired rhapsodist through whom God speaks. Again, Plato says that the poet is the mouthpiece, the spokesman of God, that God sends his own ideas to human beings through this person, the spokesman, okay, represented by the poet. A man who lacks art and volition of his own is a passive means merely. Then, according to Plato, this man who has no will to control his own mind and emotions, okay, cannot esteemed as what? A healthy man in society. Because, as I told you previously, he may take his ideas from unknown source, from wild powers. And these wild powers, sometimes we call it God or Satan. We don't know Yes. Accordingly, the Greek people think that the muse, the god of poetry, first of all inspires man herself, and from these inspired persons, a chain of other persons is suspended, who take the inspiration from them. For all good poets, epic as well as lyric, compose their beautiful poems not by art, but because they are inspired and possessed. Look to this idea. When God of poetry inspires the poet himself, if the idea of God is wrong, the poet is wrong. And those who come to follow the poet on earth will be suspended to this power, and they are going to be wrong too. And then we see there is a long chain of wrong people in society. Why? Because the mother idea is wrong, and people by their nature like to imitate. Then they imitate the poet, then the chain will be long and corruption will be the result. Yes. Again, we see that Plato objects to poetry is that inspiration is irresponsible. Like poetry itself, inspiration is irrational. That does not come from mind, the rational, it's irrational. It does not come from the mind, but it comes from a suspect source, doubtful source. Thus, Plato attacks not only poetry, but its source. It is not only the case with the poet, but its source. In short, for Plato, both inspiration and poetry are to be looked down upon since they come from the inferior part of the soul. Look, according to Plato, he says that we have two powers inside us, the mind and the heart, emotion. He says that when we deal with the heart, inferior ideas will result day after day till we reach the cheapest one in our life. While when we use our mind, okay, the most expensive ideas you get. Why? Because mind has the ability to comprehend and apprehend the ideas which are stable and fixed. And these ideas unchangeable, they are there in the world of heaven, and they are one idea, okay? One form of idea. And all these ideas on earth are just imitations, shadows, reflections, okay, of the one that is there in heaven. Again, Plato has another point of view concerning the place of the poet in the good society. This is one of the most important things till our day today. We raise this question, whether the poet is important or not. Even in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالشُّعَرَاء يَتْبَعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ. That means all people, all religions ask about the importance of the poet in society. You see? Therefore, let us see Plato and his own attitude toward the idea of the place of poet in good society. You know that Plato is a man who is looking for good society, utopian society, a perfect society. And he wants to deliver this message that there is no place for the poets in my society. Why? Because they are immoral. They are immoral for many reasons, as we are going to see today. The Republic is, you know the Republic, I mean by the Republic, the book that he wrote. It is considered the constitution of the Greek people at that time. by Plato, it is written by Plato, it is an what? Or it is a discussion of the general principles of the good society and the means by which it is to be attained. Therefore, in this book, Plato wants to discuss the good society and the means that we can reach into good society. However, our definition of the good society depends on our notions of God and of justice, education. For the good society will be education and the proper notions of these subjects. Yes, number one, the notion of God. Good society is related to the notion of God. If God is one, society will be one. If idea, the absolute ultimate idea is one, society will be good. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. That means we have to follow the absolute idea represented by one God. But you know, during the Greek society at that time, we don't have one God. We have gods. And they believe that gods at that time war with each other, fight each other, kill each other. Therefore, civil wars are or were always there in society. And justice. Justice never comes from poetry or literature. It comes from mind, from logic, not from emotions and feelings. Education. Education at that time mainly depend on the poets. Poets were teachers, as we said before. Plato wants to change this system of teaching or education. He wants to say that instead of using or giving chance to the poets to teach nation immoralities and to tell them lies from heaven, let us activate philosophy, because philosophy has direct contact with reality through the means of mind. Yes. Again, he discusses the idea of the good citizen. He says that in good society, we need to create, to find good citizen. And good citizen can be created through good education. And good education should be what? Authorized. Education comes from literature, and literature should be authorized, disciplined, okay, recognized, reviewed by the masters of knowledge. As if Plato, as if he wants to what? To restrict freedom of writing, freedom of media, freedom of talking, freedom of poetry, and to make things in the hand of morality, authority, to authorize all texts, all, let me say, forms of literature, and to make literature in the hand of the good, wise people. Because if it is good, people will be good too. Yes. This is really idea of Plato about the place of the poet in the society. Then we see Plato presents very important idea about literature, saying that while stories about gods quarreling are to be forbidden both because they are unedifying and because they are not true. Plato has no objection to children being told untrue stories if they are edifying. Again, Plato says it is okay. You want to tell your child a story. Let your story be untrue, but with morality. He says there is no any advantage from true story with more immorality. But the verse or the reverse is true. Number 3, we come to this idea, the last one, the significance of Plato's objections to poetry. Plato's primary objection to poetry might be called an epistemological. Epistemological means that is educational, aims to education, to reach education or to create kind of, let me say, educational scene in society. It stems from his theory of knowledge. If true reality consists of the ideas of things of which individual objects are but reflections or imitation, then anyone who imitates those individual objects is imitating an imitation and so producing something which is still further removed from the ultimate reality. Again, we talk about reality. For Plato, he says that reality is there in heaven, and we are just imitators. And his very important example when he says that if you recognize this table, now this is a table before me, and I think it is created by a carpenter. But there is another table which is more important, more perfect than this one now in this world. It is the table, the absolute table of heaven. It is unchangeable, it is fixed, stable. And the carpenter comes to imitate the absolute one, and he knows that it is made of wood, and he knows its function. After that, the painter or the poet comes to describe this table without knowing its material, its function. It is a matter of imitation for the sake of imitation. Then, when we measure the distance of the poet from the world of reality, we will see that the distance is very long one. Then he said, Plato said that poetry is what? Is an imitation of imitation twice or thrice removed from the world of reality. Then we have to ask ourselves, which one to follow? The mother reality or the reality of the poet? Logically, we have to follow the reality, the absolute reality, the one reality, the stable reality represented by God, by heaven, by nature, any name you like to use. Again, we see that Plato fears from literature for any or many other reasons. One of these reasons is that literature deals with passions and feelings. And he says that literature feeds and waters the passions instead of drying them up. As if Plato wants to what? To stop emotions in society. There is no place for love. There is no place for passions. There is no place for emotions in society. Why? Because we want to create a system. People who are ready to defend the case of their state. Those who are ready to go to war. And those soldiers should be fired by wisdom, by mind, not by emotions. And again, he says that poetry reflects the scenes of bloodshedding, the scenes of killing, then people will fear watching such bloody scenes in their life again. Then they will be, or they won't be able to join army or to go to the, let me say, fronts to defend the empire. Then we understand from all these points that Plato wants to make a great propaganda to recruit the men, okay, and to make them strong enough, dry people, okay, empty of emotions for the sake of defending their causes. Again, or finally, I want to say that Plato's echo or Plato's idea or ideology is still applicable, workable in most systems, okay, of this world. Why? Because most leaders, presidents, kings today try to react him again to make society strong and powerful. Thank you very much.